Thanks, Jane. I'll just kick off by saying thank you on behalf of myself and Rosie for welcoming us today. We're going to try and make this in conversation and not like PowerPoint you to death with our original game plan, but we'll see how it goes. As Jane mentioned, if you have any questions, stick them in the chat. We kind of want to make it useful for everybody rather than us going off on tangents and not being useful for you guys because as an investor, you kind of work quite broadly. So, as introduction to myself first, so I'll go first, and then Rosie can introduce her fund. My name's Sunil. My background is really in as being an entrepreneur, uh, and this is my second startup, you could say, and no longer a startup. But I started off in my career in many years ago in late 90s in PA consulting as a consultant to the life sciences sector and down the road in Melbourne. I'm based in Cambridge right now. Completed my sort of 3.75 years there, did an MBA at Cambridge. Did start at number one, which was story over a beer, but it was I was an original .com entrepreneur, and I started a business called surpriseyourwoman.com just for entertainment value. I can tell you more about that later. And then having done that for 3.5 years and ride the .com wave, we started a company called Oxford Healthcare, which was I noticed there was a lot of chemistry going into India, lots of problems around the project management communication, thought we could solve that. Remortgaged our house for a second time, started up in India with two people, grew from two people to 375 people organically, along with my brother. And then we sold it to a larger company in India called Piramal. So, sold it to a large company called Piramal in 2011, did an earn out till 2013. Then we started investing some of our ill-gotten gains into biotechs essentially. At the same time, we rebuilt our services company. So the services company is now something like 800 people based in Cambridge, Central, and India and Ahmedabad. And we've invested into 35 companies. It started off as angel investing, and then it turned into a fund. And we have a EIS fund and an SCIS fund, so it's a tax efficient fund. So you may come across that terminology. You may already know very well what they are. But investors in the UK can invest in tax efficient funds and get a rebate on their tax paid in that year. So it's kind of quite good for high risk assets like biotech and tech, where they have to take significant risk to invest, but that kind of is mitigated and supported by the government. So there are a number of EIS funds exist. That's actually quite large part of the early stage biotech investment ecosystem, whether it's angels or funds. So it's well worth getting to know what EIS is and SCS, so we can have a chat about that maybe in our conversation later. But a lot of the investment that goes in that very early stage therapeutic space is actually angel or EIS. And apart from that, it's some very large funds that come in and supports bigger tickets and fewer numbers of projects. But if you look in terms of the quantity of projects, it will be EIS or SCS or angel type things to get things going, at least in the UK. And we've invested alongside charities, Sonia's included, but also by ourselves. A lot of academic spin-outs. So we tend to partner with Nottingham University or Cambridge or such like. We sometimes start from completely from scratch, where we found companies from the beginning. We partner with entrepreneurs and just come up with ideas together and then invest. Or we do things as an academic spin out and everything else in between. We only do biotech therapeutics as a fund. We have around 10 million under management. As I said, we've got 35 companies, four are now in the clinic, and we're looking to raise a bigger fund to support some of our winners. That's a very quick whistle stop tour and introduction, and over to Rosie.
Thanks so much, Sunil. Hi everybody, I'm Rosie Barnett. I am I've been in healthcare my whole career, so super passionate about the sector and what we can do, particularly in the UK ecosystem, to really nourish the innovation and the companies that we have here. Universities obviously being a really key part of that, funds helping to support, but I really think, as the purpose of this conversation today, there's a really growing role for charities to engage here as well. So excited to have this conversation. Apologies also, I've had a cold this week, so I might be a little bit snuffly, so sorry about that. I heard someone sneeze, so I think we're probably all in the same boat. So I'm a clinician originally by background, and then, similarly to Sunil, very keen on the entrepreneurial side of things and company building. So yeah, then I moved into startups. So I worked as an operator, so on the non-investing, but actually building company side in three different companies, early stage businesses. The first being a health tech platform, which involved a lot of interaction with charities because the objective was to provide a platform, a software service for doctors and healthcare professionals to share and discuss patient cases. So the company's called MedShare, still around today, but I joined as one of the founders of that. And yeah, very much my focus there was on how we would do partnerships and make money out of the business, both on, private partnerships and getting investment, but very importantly also bringing charity partners in. So that was my first sort of formal interaction with how to commercially engage with organisations in the UK and beyond. Then I moved to a telemedicine company after that, also focusing on strategy and growth and business development here in the US and Asia. And then lastly, I was at a molecular diagnostics business. Yeah, joined to kind of lead the commercial effort there. That was talking about stories over a beer. That was a very interesting time for that company because they had a proprietary technology focused on developing diagnostic panels, non-invasive. So, it's very common now that you don't necessarily have to go to your doctor and have a blood test taken by a doctor or a nurse. Lots of home testing. It was that kind of approach, but it was at the time when COVID was really exploding, and half the board wanted to focus on COVID testing, the other half wanted to get early revenue, the other half wanted to double down on the longer term, testing side of things. So the company took the decision to not focus on COVID, which is a very interesting time to be trying to get the MHRA's attention for non-COVID related testing during the pandemic. Um, Following that, I decided to move over into the investing and company building side a bit more formally. So I joined Delin Ventures just over 2 years ago now. So I'm a principal in the London team. We are £100 million early stage life sciences focused investor and company builder. We have 8 portfolio companies where we've done more traditional sort of VC investments, and then we now have 4 company builds. So we're talking specifically more about that side of things today. So I love building things, I love operating, so it's a really exciting place to be. And particularly our focus at the moment is specializing in cell therapy and enabling technologies that sit around that. So when we think about cell therapies being developed, all of the indications that we're starting to see some promise for these kind of treatments. A lot of those will require really close links with charitable organisations to focus on patient engagement, but also interested to talk about different structures that make sense for those kinds of companies as well. So I sit on the investment team, but I also am COO of one of our company builds as well. So yeah, enough about me. Let's get
So
to the
Rosie, I'm gonna dive straight in and ask you a question. So what I mean, I do a lot of small molecules. It's cheap, easy, quick. We know how to make drugs very quickly. Why cell and gene therapy? It's very expensive, takes a long time, manufacturing costs through the roof.
Yep.
Why the focus on cell and gene?
So I think we have a really strong thesis that there have been a lot of money wasted, a lot of errors, mistakes made, but all of those things can be turned into lessons for how to build better companies in this space. So we are trying to be much more capitally efficient, to focus on where are the challenges that we think that small companies are actually well placed to address. Hopefully they will grow into bigger companies and have good returns from a venture standpoint. But we really believe that therapeutically, advanced therapies definitely have their place. They're not going to be relevant for every single disease state, but certainly in, more advanced tumors. We are starting to see some really exciting data and developments in that area. But I think, particularly when you look at a lot of the companies that have had hundreds of millions of pounds invested and haven't necessarily delivered that clinical outcome, we are trying to do things differently. And on the manufacturing point, so one of our company builds is called Adthera Bio. So that's a specialist cell and gene CDMO, because we don't think that the current CDMOs out there, so that's the companies that manufacture the therapies, we don't believe that they properly serve the needs of startups and smaller companies. They're well set up for dealing with big pharma, but there's a real gap in the market for helping to support efficiently startups as well. But yeah, we believe that we haven't seen the full potential of the clinical outcome. Yes, a lot of the companies that have been developed to date have been, you know, some of them pretty wasteful in terms of, running a lot of trials, not really getting anywhere. But we are trying to do things differently by learning from all of those challenges that have been in the market to date.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so yeah, I agree with that. There's a huge amount of money going into that space,
Yeah,
especially in the US. And obviously, being a larger fund, you can back and work with other funds. They call it syndication to support some of these, and I think you guys have done that very well. Just to bring the focus back to the charities a bit. So,
yeah,
O2H has worked with Sonia and the group before, and and so we think, we're also learning as funds as to sort of how to cooperate to get some of these therapeutics off the ground and be patient focused. And for me, the big advantage of working with a charity would be something around when you go to clinic. Patient recruitment is definitely a massive problem. And I'm on the boards of a bunch of companies, and the timelines for patient recruitment is always a lot longer than you think. And I think if you had a collaboration with a charity to support you with that, and you sort of engage with them, they have very good physician networks and can help quite significantly on recruitment sites and patient recruitment, especially for some of the rare disorders, etc. I also think, getting one of them off the ground recently around, co-funding and working together to invest in, because, we go in at a way too early than we should, but we like the science and we get stuck in. And having charitable a charity to support us or to co-invest with us to help us with the journey, I think has been really supportive and useful. And also because they can bring in philanthropic investors as well into the mix to support some of these startups. And when you're very early stage, you just have to find a way to get things going. I think charitable funding is a really good source of funding with private money and Innovate UK awards and grant funds, etc. So I think they're very supportive on that point of view. And the other thing is that is really on the communication piece because of the reach that a lot of you guys in the charitable sector have. You can really help people engage in the story, what we're trying to achieve and do, and be along with us for the journey. And really comes down to helping to build collaboration, partnerships, and syndicates for further investment because in biotech world, you need a lot of money to advance these things into drugs, which can then help patients, i.e., and so be value adding for your people who probably support your charities. So that's where I think sort of the overall key value points are for me. And I really want to engage and work with the charities further in our biotechs for all of those reasons. We've had some engagement with some of our charities. I know in the US they do it way better than us. They engage with charities from the very, very beginning and support, and they get help, and they provide communication support to the charities as well, help them raise further money. Probably someone in the company may even join the board of the charity. So there's lots of sort of cross engagement. It'd be good to sort of learn from that how to cooperate and work better with the charitable sector. So Rosie, what are your thoughts on how you engage and how you would like to engage with charities?
yeah. Definitely, we need to do more and we need to do better, particularly. And Jane, I'll come to your question in the chat in a minute. Particularly because, as you said, Sunil, quite rightly, our focus area at the moment is in these more advanced therapies, where often to get a niche and to get into the market, you might be targeting, quite relatively small patient segments initially to show that you have proof of concept, to show that you can actually get a place in the lines of treatment therapy to get treating patients and get approved. And so that makes it absolutely critical to have. I think absolutely the patient engagement piece is probably one of the most obvious areas where we can really benefit from deeply engaging with charity partners to really understand patient perspectives, but also helping with clinical development and figuring out which patient populations can be relevant for trials and who want to participate, maybe clinically relevant for them to participate. We also have another company, not so much on the cell therapy side, but I'm on the board of and very passionate about, called UMed, which is focused around addressing the kind of evidence gap and the issue where it's super expensive to get the right patients into the right trials. So they're building patient cohorts, both here and in the US. As a result of that, the way they structure it is the cohorts are around specific disease states. So the first was Parkinson's disease. The second is going to be much more broad. It's around cardiometabolic and several diseases that sit within that. And the next would be an immunology cohort. So they engage very deeply with charities. So, in the US, groups like the Michael J. Fox Foundation and many others who have actually directly invested in the company. And they're shareholders, but they're also, providing grant funding and support both on the patient, recruitment and sort of engagement perspective through the advocacy groups, but also around helping even with the product development and what's actually needed for those patient populations. So I think to Sunil's point, I think with good collaboration we can go much deeper than the sort of more obvious, easy to kind of conceptualize structures where charities help with patient and clinician engagement. I'm really keen that we can explore that in some more detail. Just coming to a couple of the questions. So Jane was asked a question in the chat around specifically in the cell therapy space, can charities contribute meaningfully to bridging this gap for high development costs and equitable access, particularly in the UK ecosystem? Um, yeah, absolutely. I think, the manufacturing costs are what they are. The ultimate goal for these is going to be to have these therapies reimbursed. So you'd hope longer down the line, if you can really show that clinical benefit that hasn't really been proven out in the market yet, that these eventually could be available to patients without them having to fund them privately. But I think that piece around, um, for example, if we were thinking about clinical trials and helping where charities could help support with the therapeutic development, engagement with a company like UMed would be super important around the immunology piece, around understanding the disease states, understanding how to get, reach to these patients and what the actual needs are, because it's all very well, developing the therapy and getting it all the way, hundreds of millions invested and getting it all the way to approval, but it needs to be absolutely critical that it's addressing, the right population, which is going to lead to the right clinical outcomes. Um, and then there's another question from Sonia there around venture building. Sunil, do you want to cover that one?
I'm happy to take that. Sonia, you got your hand up, so
I
you've
was
got a
just
follow-up
thinking
question.
on that last point, Rosie, where charities are so you've got this company, NewMed, that's reaching out to charities. Can you just talk a bit about what that reach out looks like and how the company would engage with the charity? And is it a situation where the company would put together sort of the clinical trial protocol and then get advice? I mean, it's kind of just sort of understanding a bit more about what does that engagement with patients look like from the company perspective.
Oh, interesting, Arthur. I'd love to hear about more about that. He's just said in the chat he has some experience with that with the organization. So perhaps Arthur, if you're happy to, maybe you give your perspective
Right.
from a charity side, then I can talk about it from the company side.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, glad to say a few words. So we funded them and one of the co-developers very early, actually, before it was much of a product, with the concept to see if it would work. And now we're engaging with them more or less as a client, I guess. We have a program where we act as a seed and Series A investor. We will also support repurposing trials when it's in the interest of people with Parkinson's. And some of those have, unsurprisingly, difficulties recruiting in the UK. We're not recruiting any in the US at this point. So they do have so in that case, we engage with them kind of to connect them with the trial managers, to suggest that they talk to UMed, and then often we provide the funding to allow them to pay UMed's fees. They usually have a setup fee and a per head fee as well. I think that's their standard model. So there are costs involved, but it does seem to be a very effective way to tap a pool of patients that aren't in the tertiary care clinics, aren't already going to a clinic supervised by a physician who knows about the trials. It accesses this larger pool of people who have Parkinson's, but are not in regular contact and receiving research messages. And what they've done is all the hard work to figure out the ethics and the GDPR and the governance of how patients can be contacted about trials in a way that is very compliant. So we think certainly from the Parkinson's space, it's showing that it can work, and we're encouraging our trials to consider using it as part of their recruitment strategy.
Fantastic. Thanks, Arthur. That's well, look, I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself. I
Sorry,
think that's a great example.
camera was off.
No, all good, all good. Yeah, and absolutely. And I think, the more we can replicate that model and expand for that particular company and its business model, it's essential for the growth of the business to have that engagement, and it's slightly different and more connected model, I suppose, than just generic sort of let's approach charities in our disease therapeutic indication area for patient engagement. It's really, that engagement is critical to the company growing and the company developing these cohorts. So thanks, Arthur. Thanks for sharing.
And
Thanks.
so, Arthur, just from your point of view as a charity, did you go through a certain due diligence on NewMed before you started using them or working with them?
Nothing formal. We were in touch with them and from the beginning, so we're sort of following their progress. Then we talked to other commercial clients who'd used them and found them to be successful in helping recruiting. So that was it was really knowing them rather than any kind of formal due diligence, I'm afraid. Yeah.
Okay, that's useful. Okay. And you guys pay though, as a charity, you pay NewMed.
Yeah, we pay. So they have a model where I believe the standard model is a setup fee and then a fee for every patient that's recruited through their connections into the trial. I would say that we have another program where we as a charity run a website where people can put in their postcode and learn about trials. We try to capture all the trials happening in the UK in the Parkinson's area, have them on there. Honestly, I'm not sure it's hugely productive. People who go on there say they get inundated with so many trials and studies where you can work from home and fill out a questionnaire or whatever. They have trouble finding trials that really interest them. And so we have that service, but it's not as we're a charity. We have contacts with many. We're probably the most high profile Parkinson's charity in the UK. We have thousands of people who have signed up to us to get research information. That method alone seems to me not enough, I would have to be honest.
Yeah.
Thanks, Arthur. Shall I move on to the next question, or do you want to? You got a reply to that, Rosie, or Jane? You got your hand up.
I was just going to ask, just really interested because I think we certainly have something similar on our info pool, part of the website, Arthur, around being able to access information about clinical trials. But we're moving towards a system where through our patient platform, we should be able to match willing participants to inclusion and exclusion criteria. And I just wondered whether any of the other people in the room had something similar or were thinking in that way, and whether, Sunil and Rosie, that might be a sort of solid way that charities could interact with the ecosystem to really good effect if we were able to achieve that, or whether there are systems and companies and entities already in place that you feel cover that off very well.
Well, I've been involved with a few companies which went clinical stage, and I should say that you look at multiple options to recruit patients, and you do a number of things at the same time. Charities are I think a really key place to get them on side to support and help you, and it's a win-win situation for both, obviously. So that is a really good place that is an obvious place where we can engage with charities further. So yeah, for me, it's a really big positive, and that's where, as an investor, that the value is created in the clinical stage, and as a charity, that's what that's your value as well, because you can get therapeutics out there to patients, which is what you want to do. So it's something that is, I think, really an obvious key place to work on together. But a lot of the companies when we invest are not clinical stage, so you've sort of got to get there, which comes to Sonia's earlier question about venture creation and what do we mean by that. And imagine a lot of the projects that people will be requesting to work with you on will be at that preclinical early stage area. So it leads nicely to what is venture build, what do we mean by venture building, and what can we do. So for us, I just give an example of we have a site in Cambridge in village of Hawkeston. We have a lovely grade 2 listed building there actually, and we incubate, and we had this ex AZ guy who was coming in and working from there for a bit, and he was sort of at AZ, and he moved to another company, but he really wanted to be an entrepreneur, and his area was in lipid nanoparticles. That's what he's done for the last 15 years. That's all he knows, and he's really good at it, and he knows everyone in the space. And he was looking for an area to go into, and I thought, with the right guidance, that he could be a good entrepreneur, and we could build a company around him. So we sort of really started from a blank piece of papers, where sometimes you start from an idea. This time we started with the person and some technical expertise. And I see that Melissa Heyman is there from R&ID on the call. So basically we went into the autology space, and we thought if we could deliver the LNPs into the ear, into the middle window, and maybe combine with a cochlear implant, we can improve those outcomes as a stage 1, and a stage 2 down the road, improve hearing loss for a broader group of people without the cochlea. So, we got things, moving. We set up a small LNP lab in our little building. We started to build a board around him. He's now got, a number of key opinion leaders in the spaces as joined the board and SAB. He engaged with a lot of the surgeons in the Cambridge area, and we brought them on as co-founders eventually, because we needed to make sure we had their technical expertise. And people have run clinical trials in the space as well, etc. And so, for me, venture build, that is the earliest we've ever been, where we didn't really have a company set up, and we literally co-founded and helped engage, build team, support with wet lab capability, and help design and build the research and clinical plan around it. And I know he's sort of I've connected into RNID. I'm on the board of BIA as well, and I think they were the charity that engaged with the BIA for last year. And so yeah, that would be a really classical, filling in a lot of the gaps venture build. But we've done everything between, where we've had a university spin out. I was a chair of Exnator recently, where we spun out Nottingham University. They had a well-validated target, very limited chemical matter, and no proof of concept data. And we started from the beginning. We built the board. We raised some money, got Wellcome Trust money. We did a deal with a big pharma. Now we've got a phase 2 ready product. So we started that in 2015. So it does take quite a while to go through those gears. But now we are into patients, and it's in the area of diabetic retinopathy. So for me, venture build is really about filling in the gaps. You can fill in a lot of gaps. And I think that's where O2H has a distinctive advantage, in that we're able to fill in many gaps. We're not just a pure financial investor. We have wet lab and scientific capabilities in UK and in India. And I think having something in India is really important nowadays. It costs a lot of money and to develop drugs, and if you can do it in a more efficient way, that's what we need to do, especially at that early stage. And then when you're in the clinic, you can then engage with groups here and start to get some meaningful funding into a company as well. So having some kind of incubation support or plugging capability from India, I think is really, really helpful to help build and develop therapeutics, which is what we have. You go to sort of US large VCs, and they can put in a lot of money, but they may not have all the capabilities to support. And when you're an early stage company, if you have an entrepreneur that doesn't really know how to, you can give them a lot of money, but you can also waste a lot of money. So you've got to make sure you have all the pieces of the jigsaw in place and use the cash very efficiently to build therapeutics. And as charities and as an venture investor, we're really geographic agnostic. We're really about trying to develop drugs, and we don't really care how you do it. You need to do it very quickly and efficiently. And if you're going to fail quickly. And if you can take it forward, find a way and make it happen. And you don't really care, really, which geography you do it in. So I think it's in the world we live in today, we need to get the best for all the different worlds. And I think we can, O2H does that very well. So Rosie, what do you think about venture building, venture creation?
Well, I'm very envious of the wet lab unique edge that you guys bring, because totally agree. I mean, we at the end of the day, we're all here to develop medicines for patients, which also deliver returns for investors, and having that, optionality to do your development somewhere where it might be slightly more affordable, but just as high quality is just it's so exciting for the companies that you guys build, the potential for their development. And yeah, 9 years it does sound like a long road, but in this business it can take much longer than that and much more money. So I think it's not too bad.
Yeah, I have an idea where we could incubate companies before we spin them out and get them properly funded now, because I just think the time horizon is too long for investors to wait 10, 15 years.
Right.
They just start to lose patience after 5. So
Yeah.
I think we've got to be able to, and I think universities spin out too early to meet the time horizons for venture and angel investors. So I think, there is a position where we can work with the charities to maybe incubate these assets and ideas a little bit further, and maybe using we have our UK capabilities, but also have our Indian. And I'm thinking maybe we could incubate them in a low cost, fast environment, and then bring them back into the UK and then advance them with some proper equity funding. So I think there is a gap in the market to where we can just advance academic science a bit further, maybe into late lead op, or even into completing a phase 1 clinical trial, and then bring them back into the UK, and then you've got a 5 to 8 year horizon to an exit. And I think that's just going to be more attractive. If we were able to do that through charitable funding and or big pharma donations, grants, etc., I think we could really make a difference here and advance things more quickly and more efficiently. And a lot of science is just not getting funded just because the time horizons are too long. They're sitting in academia, good ideas, and we pick off what we can, but we're a very small fund, but there's way more available than there is money to fund it. So we've just got to obviously try and pick off the things that maybe have a good entrepreneur behind it so they can run and manage it, someone who knows how to fundraise. Sometimes you're looking at those criteria rather than the science alone, because when I started investing in space, I was only looking at the science. Like, if it's a good idea, we'll fill in all the gaps. But then you realize quickly, but you need to be able to fill in a lot of other gaps. You need to have opinion leaders. You need to be able to fundraise. You need to be able to go to the US and know who to talk to in big pharma to try and collaborate early. Otherwise, it's very hard to turn your idea into a drug. So there's a lot of moving parts in drug discovery and development. And so it's not just about having a nice idea or a good well validated targets. There's a lot of other things that you need to plug in. And starting with the entrepreneur is the first time I've ever done that, but it's a successful experiment for me. I think Camgene, which is the name of that particular company, is going to do really well. And then building the idea around them. So yeah, I've done it both ways. Exonate was very much a good, well validated target, but with limited team. So you sort of built that, and most of my startups are like that. But yeah, the older I get, I'm thinking find a good person and build around it as well, so that venture build can work in both ways.
Yeah, totally. No, that's super helpful, and I think this is probably something important for this group to reflect on, is that you kind of have two forms of venture building in my mind. You have, organizations and funds like Syncona and similar funds like that, who they have a kind of a set structure of how they like to do this. They're quite rigid on what support they give. Can be very effective, but it is quite it's just very structured because they've sort of developed the model over time. What Sunil's describing, which I think is much more potentially interesting for charities to engage with beyond the sort of surface level obvious stuff that we've discussed around the patient engagement, is where you really look at the science, but also the feasibility and the commercial journey to get something to a patient. What does that look like? Assess the gaps, and then make early decisions on whether or not it makes sense to build a company around it, as Sunil's describing. And I think we try to take a similar approach. As I said, we don't unfortunately yet have wet lab capabilities, but we do try to both do our own sort of landscaping of the advanced therapy space. What do we think is missing in terms of the whole ecosystem, not just the therapeutic side? But also, as Sunil very rightly said, it's critical that we believe in the science, see the potential for the data. But when you're building something, it's so early that you need to have absolutely the right team in place, enough capital, but don't overload the company with funding that they end up being wasteful. And I guess one probably very recent example that we've started to build is a company called Ethernal Bio. So we also have Adthera Bio, which is the CDMO. I didn't name the second one, so I would have made it sound more different. But and the kind of goal of that company is it's an mRNA vaccine play aimed at treating clonal hematopoiesis, the precancerous state. But the initial indication is starting in a rare disease, SDS. So, that company we've provided the initial capital sort of equity funding. But from this point on, and we also have, it comes from sort of zero really to proof of concept is what Delin's contributing. We have an EIR from our team who's joined as The sort of one of the founders, one of our partners is acting as CEO, and that this is based out of Cambridge, actually, similar place to where Sunil's operating. And the overall aim is to develop 3 new therapies for against CH, but critically, this is a rare disease indication, so it's an absolutely essential part of the company's not just development in terms of finding the right patients and dealing with the right KOLs to validate the idea, but also really structurally thinking about the company, what it needs, and what the development path needs to look like, with the clinical development that's hopefully going to happen in the UK. We're early on in the journey of that one, but the clinicians that are involved in setting up the business are absolutely needing to engage with both the KOLs, but also the charities that sort of work in that indication, of which there aren't very many. So pretty quickly the team have built up a relationship with the relevant charities, and as the company then grows, as they start to get their proof of concept off the ground, moving into clinical development for the rare disease indication, that will expand beyond that. And I think the objective would be hopefully that there would be other charity partners that may be interested in not just grants, but actually potentially joining as equity investors in that as well. But curious also to hear if anyone has any experience with this or any thoughts from the group around charities as investors. Like, there, of course, we all know about grants, but is there an appetite in the UK ecosystem to come in as more of a shareholder equity partner, and have you guys done that, or have you experienced success with that? I know, Arthur, you mentioned you guys have an investment arm, but really curious to hear from the group or hear from the moderators.
Oh, we
Sorry,
surveyed. Sorry, I was going to say we surveyed the initial TAR membership, and it was about a third that were either investing or had interest in investing in the future. But apart from Arthur in the group, I know there are a couple of others. I wondered if they'd like to kind of add. But Arthur, you go ahead.
Yeah, I can just say just a little bit more that we are a patient organization. About 2/3 of our funding is not for research. So 1/3, approximately 10 million a year for research. Of that, about half goes to more traditional grant funding. The grant funding does have revenue sharing, IP provisions in the grants to universities, but they rarely are, yield anything. But with half our investment, about 5 million a year, it's typically on quite commercial terms alongside VCs, sometimes take an equity position in the company. And we find certainly the companies, there are companies who are very hungry for that, but we also have a global scope. So in this program, we're looking for the best drugs for people with Parkinson's. And if they're in Australia or in Denmark or in the US, we'll invest there. We know we're not as professional in the due diligence and the financial sophistication as a VC, where that is our bread and butter. But we try to, fake it until we make it.
Yeah, just on Catherine, you want to jump in?
Yes. Hi, Catherine Cole from Kidney Research UK. So we also are we've got ring-fenced funding for equity investments, and we have made several. Where we are at the moment is looking at that early stage investment. So it is that kind of preclinical, just sort of going into. So we're sort of expanding our portfolio, and as a charity, there's been some challenges around the sort of governance and decision-making processes around that. I think in that whole translational space, from research into that commercialization, we've identified I think a number of potential spin-outs or research which has got commercial potential, but those academics aren't necessarily interested in progressing it, so they might go down a licensing route and opt for that, rather than actually looking at whether or not the best option might be a spin-out company. So really interested in kind of this sort of dialogue around venture building to actually support some of our research within that. But we do take equity stakes, and we class them as social investments. So again, it's about, we understand that the value add of our brand, the credibility that a charity can actually bring to that whole cap table, but also it's about sort of providing that early stage investment where there's a gap and that valley of death. So if we come in on a syndicate basis, which is our model that we use, then it helps to leverage other investors and bring other investors on board.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly what happened with us and Stratosphere and with Jane and Sonia. I think we sort of worked together and so I'm just going to just come back to structures a little bit. So if you invest, do you do it as a grant or do you do it as a straight equity with alongside other investors?
Equity investment alongside other investors. Obviously, we do fund research, so there's a not an equity stake, but there's IP clauses in our grant funding for research that we fund. But for the investment side, it is equity investments.
Have you ever liked the science so much that you want to be, and no one's putting money in, that you'll say, right, we'll go in on our own?
We haven't got there yet, but it's not to say that we wouldn't.
Because I was thinking, sorry, just let me just go
Sorry,
on.
hang on with that thought.
I
No.
was the train of thought was I had this conversation with Innovate UK yesterday, and they invest and they do these loans now, these commercial loans, as well as all the Innovate UK awards that we know. And I was just trying to work out, is there a product that government can support with where they're not taking an equity because sometimes they can't because the valuation is not set, but they really like something. So I mean, the thought was, why didn't they do something like a convertible loan? So if you really like something and you want to go into it and you can't set the commercial terms because you're not a commercial organization, you're a charity, then maybe you could go in with a convertible loan and advance the idea, product, company, whatever, to a stage where you can then convert at the next round or a future round. Because as a charity, you want to see, drugs for patients. You're less worried about maybe the initial commercial round of your state. It's nice to get, something back for the money you're putting in, but you're trying to build that syndicate and build the company. And that's, I mean, Wellcome Trust have done something like that quite well. I mean, they have some terms which can be, difficult as well, but generally they put in money and then they convert it really at the sort of, right at the very end game. So they kind of, they do that quite well. I mean, they could do it better, but I think they do it quite well in terms of the kind of cash that they put in. So I was just thinking for the charitable sector, if you really like something, that might be, a way to go as well to pull in the thinking. And, Innovate UK loans are actually quite good. And they're going in to not just revenue generating companies, they are going into pre-revenue companies as well. So something to think about as well as to how to get some of these things off the ground. Innovate UK awards, I think, are a godsend for our sector. We really rely on Innovate UK. They really do a fantastic job. And we just need more of it, But yeah, sorry, someone else wanted to jump in. I don't want to. Jane, did you want to say something?
I was going to say we do have one convertible loan, and Arthur's put a comment about convertible loans from Parkinson's into the chat as well. So perhaps
do you want to say your comment, Arthur?
Yeah, well, it's very much our model to find the projects which are just a little bit early for other investors. So that means often being the sole funder at the seed stage, carrying them for a couple of years, and then sometimes it's an equity investment, sometimes it's a convertible loan. In the case of a multi-asset company where we're only interested in the Parkinson's asset, then it will often be a grant to be repaid, or let's say late milestones obligations that would amount to a multiple of the funding amount. So it's not, we don't take any equity, but if the product's successful, for every million we put in, we get back 2, 3, 4, 5 million.
And are you able to fund companies even if there is no company structure? Because we can't do that. So this whole venture building thing is quite interesting, but you actually have to set up a company sometimes for something that shouldn't really be in a company. So
there
how do you get around that?
Yeah, so we have when we give a grant to the university, there's equity, or there's IP rights sharing, as we heard from Kidney Research UK. Those are usually a little bit woolly. When we've done this with a serious intent that it could lead to company creation, we negotiate a different agreement with more enhanced revenue sharing, some step-in provisions if they're not commercializing and so on, and perhaps a larger share of IP revenues to the charity when we're putting $1 million or $2 million into the project while still in university. So we use a grant mechanism there, but in an enhanced way, and everyone understands that, we're aiming to ideally, be prepared for spin out.
And just to take that train of thought a little bit, so would you do that mainly with academic groups, or if you found a commercial incubator that you could say, yeah, we like the project, like we can see it's not ready to be a company formation yet. We know you're not an academic group and you're a commercial incubator or such. Would you do it with anyone who's not a kind of Cambridge University, Nottingham, such like?
Yeah, I'm
Do
just
you
having a
really
little
get?
trouble imagining who it is and we're giving the money to. But I don't see any reason why we wouldn't in principle. It would just be a matter of, finding the right arrangement where the science is supported and the a fair return is provided for the early funder.
Interesting. I'm just going to go back to the chat and see if we can. Do we want to continue on this theme, or do you want to sort of switch to a different theme? Let's have a look.
I did have a question as well while you're scanning the chat, which is you were both talking earlier about when you can build a great team around an innovation idea or need. And I wondered if you had come across, you probably have, and had any advice about if you find a great sort of bit of tech that's already spun out or might already be a startup, but the top team. So
Yeah,
aren't
I mean, really,
necessarily.
I mean, you've got to give equity to the champion, founder, CEO, and you got to make sure that they have enough of it that it feels like it's their company.
Mm.
And because they are going to get, some degree of dilution. And you don't want to be managing. What I found is I'm on the boards of 11 companies, et cetera, et cetera. I've tried to whittle that down, but you end up doing a lot of management, and what you really need to be doing is something a little bit different. So it's a hard one because when it's someone's baby, the equity doesn't really matter, and you kind of they will just drive it no matter what because they really believe in they're the best people and companies to back. Sometimes at some point when they de-risk that asset, you need to then move out the academic or the champion and put in a more commercial, scalable guy. And I think as long as you have that conversation up front, it's all absolutely fine. It's not a difficult conversation if you've already said, I'm going to invest, but as soon as this goes into clinical trials or whatever, or once we raise the Series A, we're going to have to put in a commercial guy. And are you okay with that? The answer is always yes, because they want the money. So you make that happen. When you're starting with an idea and no team, it's quite a difficult one. I won't say I've got the answer, but you have to, and it's because I think I've done a lot of work. I'm not really prepared to give 50% of the business away because why should I? So you end up doing more of it yourself. So it's something. Maybe it's a headspace thing for me, but it's quite hard to give away equity when you feel like you've done a huge amount of work to spin it out, get it ready, do a lot of and then you think, well, how can you give? You have to have it in your heart to give away enough equity to incentivize a CEO to run it as if it's their business, even though they're a paid CEO. And generally, there's a classification difference here in my mind between a paid CEO who has a bit of equity and someone who's a founder who it was idea and who spun out and it's their baby. And I would always go with the founder and the founder will take less money. They'll passionately drive that business. They'll find a plan B and C and a D and find a way to take it forward. A paid professional will come to the board and say, what do I do next? And you want that co-founder, that founder who's going to drive it. And how you do that, just basically you have to make people think it's their idea. And I don't know, that's a very, very tricky, difficult thing to do.
Yeah,
Rosie may want to comment and others, yeah.
Yeah, we just completely agree. I mean, I think in an ideal world, you always have the leader really feeling like they own it, really, they do anything for the company. But I think, we have had this in one of our companies where it wasn't quite as straightforward as they were happy to hand the reins over. But if you have a good, and to your point about all the board experience that you have and help that you can give to founders and helping them understand where their strengths are. I think one of the things that was quite challenging about that situation was, we still really, it just took a bit of time to help the founder really see that they have a critical role still in the company, but it's just what the business needs to get that all the way through the next stage of development is not necessarily their skill set. So I think in an ideal world, it's an easy conversation, but I've definitely had the experience of it being slightly more challenging. But I think that's, we are going a bit off topic here, but I think that's where when you have a really good board alignment, when you have good other co-investors if it's later stage, or you have a good relationship with the whole of the management team. It's about just having those open conversations and really looking at what does the business need, what are the milestones, what do we need to achieve, and do you have the skill set to deliver that, or can you be better placed in a slightly different role within the company? But yeah, absolutely, in an ideal world, it's much better if the founder
It's great.
can take that.
Great point, Rosie. And I think the other, in addition, is that if you have a charity, some charities have their own wet lab capabilities, their own incubators, their own way of developing the research. I mean, I'm thinking cancer research, for example. I'm sure
Right.
others around the table here have done. And I think, that if you look at their model, they generally advance things as much as they can. And rather than spin them out as separate companies, I imagine they struggled with that in the early days. I can't, they don't do a lot of actual company spin outs. They kind of license from their or partner. The reality is it's very hard to partner, collaborate, and license out as effectively at such an early stage. You have to advance the idea, the science to a stage where it's got some, commercial path. And at that point, then you might be able to do a deal with a farmer or a biotech company and do a sort of company spin out and bring on a CEO who's prepared to put his name to something because you can see where it might go. But it's, you have to be able to, if you do that kind of incubation model, you have to be able to advance it quite far, and you need to have quite deep pockets to do that. And I think some, there's a few, charities that can do that, like Cancer Research UK, for example. But it's quite hard, challenging, I think, if you're not a large charity, to be able to advance things to a stage where you can spin it out without founder management support. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's.
Maybe I can just jump in and just add to what you've just said. I'm Kitty from Cancer Research Horizons, so the commercial arm of CR UK. Yeah, you're right. We do have quite a lot of funds which can help us advance projects to a more developed stage, and that can either be if we're getting them ready to find a collaboration, a co-development partner, or to the point where we think they're ready to spin out. But I totally agree with sort of the comments you made around sort of things being spun out a bit too early and could benefit from a bit more incubation time. And I think it's important to sort of know when the right time to spin out is and when it's the right time to go and try and socialize an idea or an opportunity with other investors. There's always a balance depending on opportunity itself. But yeah, it's good to have resource to and capabilities to further things as much as possible.
Yeah. And you get proper value for that. And forget the value, it's more likely to make it to a drug. I've just come off a board meeting prior to this, and we're talking about partnering one of our clinical assets with a big pharma. It's all under due diligence and it's all going really well. And the conversation is, how do we get remunerated for this? And I'm more than likely will come back with an upfront milestones and royalties, etc. But the chat was, there's an Aussie on the board. And they've done 3 deals, etc. And other people have had experience of doing these collaborations with big pharma. And it's like every time they've done a collaboration with the pharma, their therapeutic never made it through all the hurdles. And therefore, the only money they got was up front. This is doubly bad because one is that, all the energy and effort you've put into developing a drug is not going to make it to patients because things get deprioritized for strategic reasons and or other. Didn't fit the portfolio, champion left, etc., etc. And secondly, as an investor, you're only going to get your upfront. So, there is a question of how you get remunerated. As you've put in a lot of work, we put in a lot of work. Do we just, can't be just on the royalty. It's nice when it happens, Keytruda, MRC UK, for example, but it doesn't happen very often. Arthur?
Yeah, thanks. I just want to sort of support or emphasize what Sunil and Rosie were saying about the difficulty of building companies. When we started this, we thought, I built a company before, then exited. I think I know how to do this. I found that the amount of time and expertise needed is more than one person or a small team can provide. When we've had private VCs in investing in the companies we've supported, we can see a huge difference in the maturity of the company and the development of the company and the guidance and the wisdom that board can bring when they have these experienced people like Sunil is talking about there. So I think that we now are trying to pull away from being a major supporter and trying to as often as possible get other experienced private investors in, because I think they do bring a lot of value besides the money. I can't emphasize that enough for anyone who's thinking about starting this as a charity.
Great, thank you. We've got precisely 1 minute left. I think it's been a great conversation. Thank you so much. And we've got a few takeaways around exploring opportunities for charities to invest as equity partners, but also in the context of providing convertible loans to support pre-company formation projects. I think there's a potential to follow up on charity support for commercial incubators and not just academic institutions. And I think that was a point Sunil made. And to discuss strategies for effectively transitioning from academic founder-led teams to more commercially focused management teams as biotech scales. And I'm sure that when we come back and we look at the full note of the meeting, we'll have such a lot of rich takeaways to share with the group. So thank you very much to everyone for joining. And also a big thank you to our hosts or our presenters for today, and just to thank Fraser and Dieter for sponsoring today's meeting, and have a great afternoon. Thank you
so much, everyone. It's a great conversation.